In the last 48 hours, a geopolitical seismic event has occurred that effectively ends the era of peaceful integration between the world's two most closely linked economies. While most of the American public remains focused on domestic headlines, a quiet but devastating fuse has been lit in Washington. The catalyst? An aggressive deployment of Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. To the uninitiated, Section 301 sounds like the dry, dusty language of a trade lawyer's basement. In reality, it is the nuclear option of American trade policy. It grants the president the unilateral authority to identify, investigate, and, most importantly, punish any foreign nation deemed to be engaging in unjustifiable or discriminatory practices against U.S. commerce. Crucially, it bypasses the legislative gridlock of Congress. It is an executive weapon that allows for the immediate imposition of tariffs, quotas, and sanctions without a single vote. This wasn't just a standard opening gambit in a trade negotiation. It was a kinetic strike intended to force a total submission from Ottawa. But the response from the North didn't follow the old script of polite diplomacy. What followed has sent a chill through the Pentagon and the boardrooms of every Fortune 500 company in America. Within a 6-hour window following the White House announcement, the world realized that 2026 would not be business as usual. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not respond with a carefully worded memo from the Department of Global Affairs. Instead, he commandeered national airwaves for an emergency broadcast that will likely be studied by historians for decades. His tone was devoid of the traditional middle power modesty. Staring directly into the camera with a resolve that shocked Washington insiders, Carney declared that the era of Canada being a convenient resource annex for the United States was over. Canada is not a client state, he stated. We will not be coerced. We will not be bullied. And we will not permit reckless political grandstanding to compromise the economic security of our families. However, the rhetoric was merely the preamble. The master stroke was the immediate activation of the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, CIPA. Before this week, this legislation was an obscure piece of the Canadian legal code. Under Carney's declaration, it has become a kill switch for the American economy. The act grants the Canadian federal government absolute centralized authority to seize and manage any asset deemed vital to national security. Carney didn't hesitate to redefine the term. He placed a sovereign lock on energy flows, the pipelines that fuel the American heartland, strategic minerals, the raw materials required for the U.S. defense and tech sectors, hydro assets, the freshwater reserves of the Great Lakes Basin, transit corridors, the very airspace that allows the U.S. to connect with the rest of the world. Just like that, the junior partner in the relationship reached for the master breaker of the American industrial machine. For decades, the American consumer has lived under the illusion of energy independence, or at least a reliance on friendly neighbors. Here is the cold, hard reality. Canada exports approximately 4 million barrels of oil to the United States every single day. That accounts for nearly 50% of all U.S. petroleum imports. This isn't a luxury, it is a life support system. Entire geographic regions, specifically the PADD2, Midwest, and the Northeast corridors, have built their industrial and residential heating infrastructure around a just-in-time delivery system of Canadian crude and natural gas. Historically, Canadian leaders viewed these pipelines as untouchable. To threaten the flow was seen as economic mutually assured destruction. Carney, however, has discarded that doctrine. By placing these exports under immediate security review, he has signaled that Canada is willing to endure its own economic pain to prove its sovereignty. The markets reacted with pure, unadulterated panic. Within hours, oil futures spiked by 12%, natural gas surged by 18%. Utility warnings. Power companies from Michigan to Minnesota began issuing load-shedding alerts, warning of imminent supply crunches as winter approached. The White House switchboard is reportedly being overwhelmed by governors from both sides of the aisle. For these leaders, this isn't a debate about trade laws. It's about millions of voters facing a winter without heat. If the energy crisis is the immediate threat, the mineral freeze is the existential one. While Washington frequently discusses decoupling from China, it has quietly built an even more profound dependency on its northern neighbor For the materials of the future, Canada is a global titan in the critical minerals sector. It controls the vast majority of the Western supply of 1. Lithium and cobalt, essential for the EV revolution and grid-scale storage. 2. Rare earth elements, the vitamins of industry required for everything from iPhone screens to the guidance systems in Tomahawk missiles. 3. Potash, the primary fertilizer component that keeps U.S. agricultural yields at record levels. The Pentagon is currently in a state of high alert. The American military-industrial complex is fundamentally incapable of building the F-35 Lightning II or advanced communication satellites without Canadian refined minerals. By halting export permits for strategic review, Carney has effectively placed the U.S. defense supply chain into a coma. This isn't just about money, it's about the hardware of national security. Canada holds the keys to a vault that the U.S. cannot replicate domestically for at least a decade. The most unexpected, and perhaps the most clever element of Carney's counteroffensive, was the weaponization of Canadian airspace. Every day, hundreds of U.S. commercial and cargo flights rely on Great Circle routes that cross over Canadian territory to reach Europe and Asia. These routes are the most fuel-efficient and time-sensitive paths in the world. By suggesting that sovereign transit corridors are now under the jurisdiction of the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, Canada has introduced a logistical nightmare for the aviation industry. If U.S. carriers like United, Delta, and American Airlines are forced to circumvent Canadian airspace, the consequences are catastrophic. Flight duration. Transatlantic and trans-Pacific flights could increase by 2 to 4 hours. Fuel consumption. The additional jet fuel costs would run into the billions. Cargo grids. Just-in-time shipping for high-value electronics and medical supplies would effectively seize up. Aviation analysts are already projecting a $40 billion annual blow to the U.S. airline sector alone. As the Dow Jones plummeted hundreds of points in a single session, a strange divergence appeared. While Wall Street bled, the Toronto Stock Exchange, TSX, remained remarkably resilient. The Canadian dollar actually rallied. Global traders realized that, in this specific game of chicken, Canada was the one holding the trump card. Washington launched this trade war under the assumption that the sheer size of the U.S. GDP would force an immediate Canadian capitulation. It was a classic calculation of massive power versus middle power. But Mark Carney's counteroffensive has revealed a fundamental flaw in that logic. In a hyper-integrated high-tech world, the size of your economy matters far less than your control over choke points. A massive GDP is a liability, not an asset, when you cannot heat your cities, fuel your jets, or build your missiles without the cooperation of the neighbor you just insulted. The U.S. is now staring down a dangerous dilemma. 1. Double down. Escalate the Section 301 penalties, risking a total shutoff of Canadian resources and a domestic economic depression. 2. The off-ramp. Find a diplomatic way to back down without losing face, acknowledging that the partnership with Canada is a matter of survival, not just trade. One thing is now undeniably certain. The era of the quiet border is dead. Canada has proven that when pushed to the brink, it has the leverage to bring the most powerful economy on Earth to a grinding halt. The question for 2026 is no longer about who has the bigger economy. It's about who controls the switch that keeps that economy running.